Welcome back to Makeup Up and Away. I'm Jessa Green, and this is where I talk about aviation and do my makeup. This is episode 2, where I'm going to be covering the crashes of United Airlines flight 585 and US Air's 427, and another flight that helped solve the two. Planes don't just fall out of a sky, or do they? So what happened to United Airlines flight 585, you ask? Well, let's jump into it. So again, we're continuing our focus on multi-accident plane crashes, and again on Boeing 737s. This time it is a 200 series. 585 was preparing to land in Colorado Springs. I can't talk. United Airlines flight 585 was preparing to land in Colorado Springs, Colorado on March 1st, 1991. There were 25 people on board this flight. It was a Boeing 737-200 series. On their approach to land, this plane rolls to the right and they are sent into a vertical dive. All 25 people on board sadly perish. The crash left NTSB, which is the National Transportation Safety Board, puzzled, as they couldn't identify what brought the plane down. Due to the severe bank of the plane, they're focusing on the rudder. So then they start thinking perhaps it is a horizontal axis wind vortex, but they're never able to conclusively determine that it's weather related. But the reports, they sum it up to basically two likely causes. Either the plane's directional control system malfunctioned or the weather. And this is only the 4th time in NTSB history that they've ever left one of their reports as undetermined. This event is also one of the longest investigations in their history. I'm gonna pop on some lashes and mascara and liner off camera because I am not about to do that today, but it's really not gonna be anything that crazy. On September 8th, 1994, much like the first crash, US Air Flight 427 was on approach to Pittsburgh International Airport. They had just come from Chicago O'Hare. Pittsburgh was like, I think a layover for some. They were picking up passengers and continuing on to West Palm Beach, Florida. There were 137 people on board, and much like the first plane, they were getting ready to land. And then on the flight data recorder, you can hear the pilots confirm that they see the jet stream, and then all of a sudden, plane banks to the left. They were able to roll the plane to the right and level the plane until it happens again. As soon as it happens again, they bank to the left, nosedive, they do not recover. Boeing's initial speculation of the cause was pilot error, stating that the pilot may have responded incorrectly to wake turbulence as they encountered the jet stream. So I was 8 years old when this plane crashed, and it crashed right outside of Pittsburgh in Hopewell, Pennsylvania. And where I used to live, where I grew up, was Lisbon, Ohio, and this was probably about 50 minutes from our house, and my dad used to work in Pennsylvania, so this was kind of like our airport. And again, like, I was only 8 years old when this plane went down, and you don't realize what a toll this takes on the local community when you have something this catastrophic happen. We didn't know anyone personally was killed in the crash, but I did research, and a woman's husband was killed on this crash, and she and one of the first responders actually ended up getting married. And I was like, oh, that's sad. Like, at least they had each other. So like I had said, I was only 8 years old when this plane crash happened, and I just remember watching it on the news. I remember it was such a huge deal, and it was actually pretty close to where I think my dad worked, and we went and saw the crash site. And I came back, so I was homeschooled, and we came back home and I wrote about it in my journal. I think I still have it. So I, reflecting back on this, I do believe that this was probably where my fear of flying came from. It wasn't until I was flying a lot to Texas from Ohio and I was flying on American Airlines, that I really started taking an active role or interest, if you will, in aviation. On American Airlines, you can see what type of plane you're going to be on, and you can see like where the flight is before. It's all on the app, like it tells you. I didn't start taking an active role in knowing like what kind of plane I was gonna be on, or just really any interest in flying in general, until I was flying all the time. I know that my fear of flying came from my parents kind of exposing us to this plane crash, and that, I mean, not that it was in any way traumatic to me. I didn't lose anybody, but I think that it just like, I was just too young to know about it, and I probably shouldn't have, because I definitely flew when I was 7 years old. We took you know, like a family vacation to, I think it was Outer Banks. I think we went to Myrtle Beach or something when I was 7. And I remember flying on the plane, because I remember the seat was like tweed, like it was like a rougher material, and I remember looking at it, and I remember looking outside and being like, wow, this is cool, but there was zero, you know, it left me with zero fear. And then I didn't fly until I was 18 years old, and I was flying to New York City, and I was terrified. I was flying out of Akron-Canton Regional Airport, and I was flying to LaGuardia, and it was a tiny, 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 tiny little plane. And I just remember going, oh, I don't want to go anymore. I'm good. Like, I want to stay home. I don't want to go. This is not for me. It's like, it's like sardines. I can't do it. Of course, we made it. It was no big deal. I think US Air Flight 427 left a really big impact, not only on the community, but like just me as a kid. And I do find it interesting. I was watching called The Flight Attendant, and it has the girl from Big Bang Theory in it. I can't remember her name, but she plays a flight attendant, and there's a plane crash, and she like runs to it as a child, and they're like, oh, did you run to go help, or did you run because you're addicted to chaos? And I was like, oh, maybe that's why I like plane crashes. But actually, I think I'm just a control freak, and I think that's why I like learning about aviation, because it makes me feel like I am in control. It's such a false sense of it, because I can't do anything. What am I gonna do? Knock on the door? Oh, the pilots are incapacitated. Somebody hold my bag. Let me jump in and fly this plane. I think if you're your PPL, you know at least what's happening. You know, like basic aviation stuff. You don't maybe know how to fly a 737. And also, since I was little, I have constantly had, like at least once a month, I have a dream where I'm in a plane and it's either going down or there's some sort of like malfunction happening. And I don't know what that's about. Is that normal? Can anyone else relate? If you can relate, leave it in the comments and tell me. So yeah, that's where my fear and my love of aviation stems from. I think that when you don't understand something, you do tend to fear it. As soon as you learn about what you fear, you begin to kind of like or possibly enjoy it. I think this could be extended to people as well. So if you're struggling with a fear of flying, it could just be perhaps that you just don't understand it. So I highly recommend. There's lots of good YouTube videos out there. If you're terrified of turbulence, you can watch a video on it that easily explains it, and slowly watch your fear disappear. And the next time you hit some rough air, it won't be so rough. So both these flights that we just talked about, NTSB is puzzled. They can't figure out why this is happening. They know it's a rudder issue because planes are banking either left or right. They're confused. They're trying to blame the pilots. That's enough of that Boeing. But you know, they have 2 fatal flights, and it is surprising to me that they don't ground them. Much like the Max Pro 8, I feel like Boeing should have said, oh my God, we have 2 flights. I think, you know what, within 2.5 years of each other, maybe we should take a good look and figure out what's going on so we don't have a 3rd. Well, we didn't have a 3rd in the US, but Eastwind Air Flight 517 saves the day. And it had to have been one of the most terrifying experiences. I can't imagine being on a plane, the ding goes and they're like, oh, prepare cabin for landing. And you know, or the pilot's like, oh, I'm gonna turn the seatbelt sign on, guys, so you all should go pee real quick. And then you go and then you sit down and you're like, okay, I'm gonna land. I can't wait to get there. I can't wait to see whoever, whatever. And then you start banking, like a bank, like like you're here and then you're here. I can't imagine. I'm sorry, goodbye, I'll walk. Fast forward almost 2 years to June 9th, 1996. Flight 517 with East Wind Airlines. It's funny because US Air, she's done, and so is East Wind. Like, nobody knows of these. Now we have, really the major ones are Delta, United, American, and then you have like Southwest and Frontier and Spirit. Not to go on a rabbit hole, but US Air was purchased by American Airlines, I think in 2013, and they were gonna keep the name, and I think it was like 2015, they basically like redid their planes to American Airlines. So it is interesting to see how these airlines kind of just get eaten up by the bigger ones. This flight had 53 people on board, and they were in a Boeing 737-200 series. They were heading from Trenton, New Jersey, which is where East Wind's base was from, to Richmond, Virginia. So again, this plane was going to land, and they were at a higher altitude when the same thing happened to them. So they briefly lose control of the aircraft. It banks just like the other two accidents did. However, being at a higher altitude let them recover. And then also this time, because it didn't result in a crash, NTSB was able to speak directly to the pilots and ask them exactly what happened, what was their experience. So the plane's rudder and the entire plane was still intact. Nobody died, and NTSB got to investigate and see exactly what was going on with the rudder. NTSB and Boeing's engineers determined it was the PCU, or the power control unit's dual servo valve. This valve is the size of one of my makeup brushes, and it is responsible for rudder movement. After testing the servo valve, it was determined that under the right circumstances, it could jam and do the opposite of what the pilot was directing it to do. A cold PCU mixed with hot hydraulic fluid could result in a malfunction. Something the size of this brought 2 planes down and almost a third one in the US. And I kept thinking, out of all the 737s, it was like 300s and 200 series, there's so many in operation all over the world, there had to have been more incidents, and there were. This couldn't be an isolated incident. They did determine that the dual servo valve was probably likely responsible for other crashes. So the outcome was the FAA requiring all 737 servo valves to be replaced by November 12th, 2002. But this third incident occurred nearly 3 years before. So the investigation must have taken that long, and then I don't know when the final report was, but my goodness, that's a lot of planes being flown. I will say, I love in aviation that as soon as they do determine the cause of things are fixed. They implement like new training protocols so pilots can recover unexpected movements in the aircraft. Anytime there's an incident, they improve it, and they create a checklist to follow and operating procedures for the next time. And that is why aviation is the safest form of travel. I hope you guys liked today's episode. I think I'm gonna take a break from plane crashes and cover a really interesting individual in next week's episode. So definitely subscribe. Please like this and leave a comment. It really helps me out. I am trying to get this channel up and away. So any help definitely is appreciated. Thank you so much for watching.